This painting is complex. It's a painting that I've done several versions of this before, but I'm always intrigued by the idea of layering in a painting, foreground, middle ground, background, and creating a sense of environment in almost a busy environment, but trying to figure out where my focus is and putting a lot into the color and the feeling of the mood of the piece, and that's really what this painting's about. And it's as in a lot of these paintings, it really is mood. It's about sort of a stillness, a moment in time kind of captured, and that's really what this is. And it's about serenity in a sense. This is a group of small paintings. I've got some others in the show too, but the smaller paintings are interesting to me just because the large paintings take a lot of time, a lot of surface area to work with. The small paintings don't have that, so they're more immediate. And many times I switch back and forth between the large paintings and the small paintings because it gives me a sense of relief or difference in the painting style almost. Every little stroke means a lot in a small painting, where in a larger painting you're trying to get more volume into it. Here, if in any of these three, if you have a little tiny bit of color, it really means a lot when you have a 12 by 12 inch surface area. And again, as I said in the painting previous to this, it's really about mood, and it's really about contrast in terms of sense of color and a sense of calmness that I'm trying to get to in these paintings. And that's really it's if I can achieve paintings that can affect the viewer and give them that same sense of mood and calmness, then I think I've succeeded. This painting's almost iconic in a way, in the sense you've got a figure on horseback, and a kind of statuesque type of pose against a big cloud in the background, and overlooking some mountains and up high, and it just has. I don't normally do this kind of painting, but I wanted to do it on this one just because it has it has this again iconic kind of Western feeling to it, and I wanted to achieve that. My favorite part of this whole painting are the big boulders and the rocks. Whenever I have a chance to do big, bold strokes on something, that's what I enjoy the most. When the paint gets really thick and I can interject color where maybe there's not that color there, but I accentuate it. So areas like the blues and the reds, there's hints of those kind of colors in those kind of rocks, but I push them way more than they are in reality. In this painting, there's a level of complexity to it, but it's not a level of complexity in terms of rendering. And where some of the paintings turning form more, this one actually has a far more graphic feel, flatter shapes. There still is a sense of atmospheric perspective, and which I always try to get in any kind of landscape, but where you have a foreground and you're receding. But what I really wanted to achieve with this was to keep a lot of the shapes really bold and very crisp, and I do that with not only flatter shapes interjected with some brushwork, but flatter shapes and then outlining, and you'll see that in some of the other paintings too. It's a pretty, goes back to a history of illustration. A lot of illustration had a lot of outline on the figures, on the objects in the painting, and that really was to put an emphasis on things. But it works really, really well to get a feeling, a graphic feeling, and maybe a little bit more of a punchy piece. Okay, this painting again is one of those very much like a couple of the others, which really has a larger, wider scope in terms of its viewpoint. A lot of times I'm narrowing down the viewpoint and focusing in on a tighter cropping on things. But this one, again, I wanted that vast horizon, the idea of this monumental kind of feeling to the cloud shapes. And I might talk for a minute about I've been reading a lot of Maynard Dixon's poems, and part of the show, I originally wanted to do a show based on his poems, but it was becoming way too illustrative, like I'm illustrating his poems. So I was just reading his poems, and many of the works were derived from, and even some of the titles were derived from certain phrasing or certain things that he wrote in his poetry, and sometimes a combination of things, and just words like this one is the title "Descending," and that was just in one of his poems, that word, but it connected to what I wanted to do with this. So it's interesting to use that as a poetry as sort of a bit of an influence, but not directly. It's sort of in the background. Again, a complex painting because it's a lot of light, and so my whole goal here was to not only get the feeling of light, but get the feeling of still have a feeling of focus on the figure, even to the point of controlling things like, here's a lot of light up here, everything's going down here, everything's being lit from the left, and I do little things like on this sagebrush over here, put just a little bit of light over here, even though it really wasn't there in my reference, but little things like that pull the eye back down and weight the painting, I think, in terms of balance in every painting I do. So this painting, I've done a lot of snow scenes, and Mark Sublette and I were talking, and he was asking me which painting was a favorite of mine, and this one is, because with all the complexity going on in a lot of the other paintings, I enjoyed this painting because of the simplicity of it. You know, it hasn't got a lot of elements in it. It has a creek. It has a small figure and a horse in the background, but the rest is big, bold shapes. So I was able to just get into the texture and the shapes, having fun manipulating things without actually having to define them too much. And that's the great thing about snow paintings, is that, you know, it can be whatever you want it to be, because you have white, and white is affected by all kinds of light. Cool light, warm light, you know, you can have darker areas and lighter areas, and it's all about shapes. And if you take any one of these shapes here, this is just painting, just paint applied and texture. So overall, it's just it's a very simple painting in one sense, but complex in terms of its paint quality. Okay, these two paintings, they're both, again, both have a certain amount of snow in them. They're not like the last one I just talked about, which is you're deep into the snow. You're enveloped by it. So they're both have a sense of that, you know, snow color, but not. It's really more about what's in the foreground in both of these. In this one, but they're both different in the sense of the viewpoint. You know, where this one is, you've got these weeds, I guess, for willows maybe. I don't know what they are exactly. Some sort of dried vegetation, winter vegetation. But I used it to, again, put emphasis on what was in the background. I used it as a deep foreground element. Here I don't have that deep foreground element. So the two are totally different, even though the coloration is very similar. This one has, again, that wide scope, and you know, you're looking at a vastness here. Here we're a little bit more focused in. This painting, it's probably the most intense in terms of its, I mean, I've got a lot of fall foliage just because it's a great color. I love that kind of reddish, yellowish color, and it works well, I think, in terms of setting a time of year. And this one is probably the most intense of all these paintings, and just because I decided to just go full on fall foliage, and it presented a lot of problems because it's like, okay, so you've got yellow on yellow on yellow, so what do you do? And again, it's the idea of small bits of color interjected into that yellow, and how do you put emphasis on a certain amount of that bright color and downplay the rest. And even though a lot of this looks very yellow, this area to here is almost white, you know. So we've got a sense of almost a spotlit effect right in this area. Even though that light is coming from the left, it's not a spotlit light, but I wanted to again put emphasis on one little area, and that's really what this is about. Complexity, but with focus. This little painting, again, I've talked about some of the smaller paintings in the show, and this one was another one that is, and I've done this subject matter, different times, larger, and pretty large actually, really large. And this one is just a small one of this kind of symbolic or iconic three figures walking through sagebrush. But in this case, I was getting a little bit more decorative, a little bit more abstract with some of the background shapes. And maybe, I don't know, even abstraction is the word, modernist artists, that the whole movement really has always influenced me, and that's kind of what a lot of this kind of linear brushwork in the background's about. And then again, borrowing a little bit of a Dixon poem, Mountain Song. It just seemed to fit the lyrical quality that this painting had. Okay, these Kachinas, very colorful subject matter. I've done quite a few of them, and I always enjoy the painting that comes from working on paintings of Kachinas, and because they're so graphic. I mean, they're pieces of artwork to begin with. So my whole idea when I'm working on Kachinas is, what can I bring to it that the artisan that created these figures in the beginning didn't bring to it, you know? So how can I emphasize things, or how can I make it my own? And that's what I try to do with these paintings. So there's texture, there's if you were to look closely at these, there's linear scratching in the paint, there's scraping. I do different abstract paintings at different times, and that has a lot of this kind of mark making that sometimes isn't as prevalent in my other work, because I'm doing something a little bit more realistic. With these, they become it's all about not just the subject matter, but it becomes very much about the surface texture and the surface quality of the paintings. And these were just really a lot of fun to do, because they were really large and way larger than life size. And so that's where it's almost like pop art in that sense.